Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Mistra, for inviting me. I'm going to talk about 4 dates, 1984, 1994, 2004, and 2014, and probably 2015 might sneak in too. I'm going to talk about 4 subjects. I'm going to talk about my own journey to being here today, why we founded Generation 10 plus years ago, what have we learned in these last 10 years, a lot is the answer, and then what is the future and what should we be thinking about, and hopefully that will be useful for our conversation as a panel. So 1984, actually maybe even a little bit before then, 1977, I went to university in America. And I went to university because I wanted to be a teacher. And I started my academic career, and about halfway through it, they discontinued the education department at the university I was going to. So I had to look for a different career as opposed to being a teacher. So I chose child psychology because I thought that was closest to teaching. It turns out that that was the single best degree I could have chosen for my subsequent career of managing fund managers and investment bankers. But I really struggled to get a job when I graduated in 1981, and I actually applied to the Peace Corps and was rejected, which is really hard to do because it's a volunteer organization. Really actually shook my confidence, if I'm honest. Even to this day, I don't really fully understand it. In any event, I was going towards graduating, and my father noticed that I did not have a job. He was quite concerned that I would be coming back home, and he suggested that I try banking. So the first time I thought of joining finance was 1981, simply because I had no other choice. I applied to 70 banks in the United States, was rejected by 69 of them, received 1 yes, and started my career in finance. And sadly for you all, I'm here today. But as I started in finance, I realized that I liked it. And after 2 years working at a company called Bankers Trust, which is no longer in business, and I'll come back to that in a second, I went to business school. And in business school, at the time, and still in many programs, they're 2 years. And so in between your first and second year, you do a summer internship. And I worked at I had decided I wanted to be an investment banker. And I worked at a firm called E.F. Hutton. And I must tell you, it was the single worst summer associate experience you could ever have imagined. I was working from 6 in the morning till 12, 1, 2 in the morning. The business principles of what we were trying to accomplish were not known to me. It seemed that every single financing we did was for tax purposes as opposed to other purposes. There was no sense of culture. There was no sense of teamwork. Everybody seemed to be focused on themselves, and I hated every second of it. So I returned to school and had decided that there would be no chance that I would stay in finance, and certainly no chance that I would be an investment banker. But as the autumn went on, I kept thinking, well, gosh, that's really too bad, because I thought I liked finance. And so it occurred to me that I had made a mistake, that I did not do enough work in anticipation of learning about the cultures of the organizations, and that if I could just find an organization that matched what I thought was important, then maybe I could find an organization that I could do well at and enjoy. So in 1984, early 1985, I did an analysis of all the major investment banks in the United States, North America, and indeed in Europe. And what I was focusing on was the culture of those organizations, what made them successful, how they organized themselves, the governance, and how people could be successful or not, their business principles, if you will. I realize that today talking about business principles and investment banking seems different and doesn't necessarily make sense, but it did to me in 1984. And I identified that actually Goldman Sachs was the organization that most fit what I thought was important. Their core business principles were written in 1982 by John Weinberg and John Whitehead, and I was fortunate enough to get a job at Goldman Sachs and began my career in finance at that time. But that's not why I tell the story. I tell the story because what happened since then has become very illustrative of why sustainability matters to investing and to business. What I discovered is that the work that I did to understand the cultures of an investment bank or human capital-based business actually could predict the success of those businesses over time. And since 1985, when I've been in finance, I've seen multiple businesses in investment banking fail. Drexel, Lehman, Bear Stearns, Salomon Brothers, Baring Brothers. The list is really quite long. Kidder Peabody. If you go back and analyze those businesses and why they failed, almost all of them failed for failures of sustainability. Failures of ethics, governance, leadership, incentive structures, failures of culture. Oftentimes we talk about strong cultures. Strong cultures can be bad cultures too. Many of them had strong cultures. Salomon Brothers had a very strong culture, but it turned out to be a poor culture in the end in terms of the success of the organization. So it was that insight coupled with some of my colleagues that caused us to decide that in fact setting up a firm that was based on sustainability, and I'll come back to that in a second, could be a really interesting way to analyze businesses and ultimately make investment decisions. Now let's talk about 1994. That, of course, is the founding, more or less, of Mistra and why we're here this afternoon. And I will say that Mistra has an extraordinary important place in Mark Mills, my partner's heart, and I, as well as our other partner, Al Gore, because Mistra was our first institutional client. This was now in 2004. Marta and Mans, I still don't know what you were thinking, deciding to entrust us with managing the important work and the assets of the Mistra Foundation, but it has absolutely been the most important event for us as an organization, and we can't thank you all enough for the support that you showed us and the commitment that you showed us, and thankfully I think things have worked out pretty well since that time. In 2004, when we started our journey at Generation, we founded the firm based on three sort of fundamental points of view. The first was that long-term investing is best practice. That's still very much true today. That's critical to thinking around sustainability, incidentally. Trading and short-termism is a disease, oftentimes. It's certainly extremely counterproductive to sustainability, broadly speaking. And long-termism is really the perspective on markets that we need to be supporting. And certainly when we write about sustainable capitalism, it always comes back to being long-term versus being short-term. The second observation that we had when we founded the firm was going back to the story around E.F. Hutton, is that we believed, we had no certain proof of it, but we believed that sustainability would drive the long-term success of business. We observed in our own experiences around culture and around human capital management. We observed that other businesses were driven by sustainability factors as well, license to operate, reputation, efficiency, et cetera, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And we observed in 2004, and certainly observe again today, that the sustainability challenges that the world faces are significant, they're interrelated, and they're getting more acute. Water, climate change, health, demographics, sustainable development, poverty. The list is really quite long. It's all interlinked, and it's becoming ever more significant. And what we observed is the observation that we thought that that we thought the government and civil society would be part of the solution, but did not have enough capital or indeed innovation to be the sole solution of these challenges. And so we suspected that we as people would require and expect that business be part of the solution, and that business was recognized that being part of the solution was an opportunity. We also observed, and again, even more so today, that the resource constraints that we all face, and in fact, the observation of how markets have developed, how capitalism has developed, how economies have developed over the last 100, 150 years, that the observation that we had infinite resources was incorrect. The facts are is that we have finite resources, which is beginning to translate into significant transformation of multiple industries. And we're just at the beginning, and I'll come back to that. So we found a generation because we thought it made sense from a business perspective, because we knew that long-term investing was best practice, and that the context of business was changing and would continue to change. Rolling forward 10 years now to more or less 2014, we had our 10-year anniversary in April. Our investment track record for our first strategy of global equities will be, in fact, in February 1st, so it's nearly a 10-year track record. I seldom like to talk about investment performance, because I've observed over the years that as soon as an investment professional tells you how smart they are, that's exactly the point that performance goes down. So I will not say that, except to say we've been fortunate, maybe we've been lucky, but our track record is pretty good. And that is critical in terms of one of the things we're trying to prove, which is the business case around sustainability. And I will come back to that. But we've learned a lot in these last 10 years around the business case for sustainability. Some of which we've learned, we suspect, is now common knowledge and largely accepted. Some of which we've learned is still to be discussed, and I will conclude with that in a moment. So what have we learned that what more or less people acknowledge, and I think is becoming mainstream? The first is sustainability is an excellent risk management tool. If you can avoid buying businesses, the old adage is in investing is that great investors avoid great mistakes. And we've discovered that the sustainability lens on the quality of business and quality of management has helped us avoid great mistakes. There's no guarantee that we will continue to avoid them, but it's helped us a lot over these last 10 years. If you can avoid investing in a business that dumps a lot of oil into the Gulf of Mexico, that almost always is a good idea. If you can avoid businesses that lose their license to operate because of either their business model or their carbon footprint is unacceptable to communities, that's a good idea. If you can avoid investing in coal companies, as an example, where their business model is in significant transition and the stock goes down 80% this year, that's probably a good idea as a general rule. On balance, reputation matters. Disasters matter in business, and if you can avoid those, that's a good thing. And we have discovered that sustainability is a great lens. And it's not just in equities, actually. It's in every aspect of investing, ranging from fixed income. Of course, in fixed income, it's probably most interesting because, remember, in fixed income, your objective is to get your money back, and hopefully the coupon. If you can avoid really bad outcomes, that usually helps you get your money back. Sustainability is a great tool for that, and true across all the asset classes. So most people would now say that using sustainability at a minimum will help you avoid, not guarantee, but will help you avoid really bad outcomes. The second aspect of sustainability that we think we've learned and we think increasingly is relevant is that we live in a resource-constrained world. That's now clear. And businesses who embrace the resource constraints and are trying to operate their business in a way that that either reuses assets or minimizes use of assets tend to perform better, both in terms of their cost base, but oftentimes in terms of their revenue base. And so as we continue down this journey of resource constraints and transition to different types of economies, the extent that businesses can be thoughtful about managing their resources, which of course includes human capital, then almost always that is a good outcome. And thinking about that from a sustainability perspective, asking those questions is a very good lens, a very good tool. The third thing that we've learned, which is still open for many people, probably people in this room as well, is whether sustainability can help you make positive decisions, help you identify great businesses, or because I know that we're going to talk about companies themselves. Companies can use sustainability as a way to drive revenues, profitability, and competitive positioning. We think you can. What we've been able to demonstrate over these last 10 years is identifying great businesses and great management teams that are using their products and services to address sustainability challenges, whether it be climate, whether it be health, whether it be obesity, whether that be poverty, to drive revenues, profitability, and competitive position. So we think sustainability is not a give up. In fact, from the very beginning, we have said that by integrating sustainability into our investment process, we think we can make better investment decisions over time than those who do not. So what about the future? In 2000 and I guess it would have been 2010 probably, Al and I wrote an op-ed in the Financial Times explaining that the financial crisis was in large part due to failures of sustainability, and that we had reached an inflection point, that the world would clearly be recognizing that sustainability would be best practice in economies and in business and by extension investing, and that we would see a very rapid transition to more sustainable economies. We were very wrong. By 2011, the concept around sustainability, actually, I think we wrote this in 2009, and then we saw that by 2010, 11, we were very wrong. And we began to discover this when people were saying that we can't be bothered with sustainability now. We can't be bothered about environmental or social governance issues when the world is in dire circumstances. We can't think about climate change now. We have to just worry about jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, we do worry about jobs as a group as well. But what we realized is that we had not been successful in making the business case around sustainability. And so we wrote a paper in 2012 around sustainable capitalism where we tried to make the business case why companies, and by extension investors, and why economies should be more focused on the long term and recognize that this is a rigorous and thoughtful investment decision, business decision, as opposed to nice to have values-based decision, though we obviously care about values. As we go into 2015, we would say we've made modest progress on making the business case. Probably here in Sweden, more progress. Mistra has been a critical part of this, so has the AP funds, so has a number of the asset managers here who are here today. But in North America, progress has been at best marginal. And it's because we've not really thoroughly convinced people that this is a business discussion. People continue to think that sustainability is nice to have and values-based and really not proper investing. So we have much more work to do to think carefully about why sustainability is best practice and how to describe that and how to prove that much more effectively. And certainly we will in fact write a follow-up paper to a sustainable capitalism paper over the course of the next 3 to 6 months to try to even be more clear in the business case for sustainability, and we welcome everybody and anybody to be part of this debate. It's really quite critical. The second observation around what needs to happen going forward, and you mentioned it in the beginning around impact. For many of us, there is a emerging conversation around impact investing. And whether that is a trade-off for financial results or not, we would argue that you can have great impact and have great returns in many instances, or you could choose to give up some return for impact. The critical component, though, will be measuring and understanding that impact. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done in understanding what we mean by impact. Mistra talked about the impact of its policies on its carbon footprint. That's a good first step, but there needs to be much more sophistication around impact. And lastly, we need to think about the transition to a low-carbon economy. It's happening now. It is certainly happening. It is likely, though, to accelerate quite dramatically over the next 5 years. And we as investors need to think about the risks associated with that transition, as well as the opportunities associated with that transition. We're not yet, I think, fully aware, even those of us who are in this field and thinking about it, we probably underestimate how quickly this will change. When we founded Generation in 2003, 2004, 2020 was 15 years away. And we thought, well, we're beginning, and remember that 2020 is really that first threshold on measuring the sort of the flattening of the carbon curve and really bringing it back down to try to stay within 2 degrees Celsius. It's now 2015, or soon to be 2015. 5 years is a very short period of time, but the world is waking up and we're beginning to realize that we're going to have to move much more quickly. The announcements by China and the US are critical in that, but even more important is the technology and the innovation that we've seen in green finance or in the transition to a low-carbon economy that is making things like solar actually cost competitive in 80% of the world within the next 2 or 3 years. So this is happening. It's a big deal. We don't fully appreciate that, but there are significant opportunities and risks that we have to consider in our portfolios. To conclude, I guess, is to say thank you again to Mistra. There would be no question that were it not for Mistra mandating us really our first outside capital, I doubt very much that we would have been as successful as we've been. We are forever indebted, and we thank you very much.
Hey, you stay. Thank you, David. Excellent.
I don't like this.
No, that's fine.
We're not.
Why is this?
I was saying he was very youngish and energetic in 2004, but I feel you're equally youngish and energetic now. It's great to see, and congratulations on 10 great years, I must tell you, and leadership as well on many of these topics. Question-wise, to keep time, I'm going to lead it to my sidekick to pick one question now, and then we'll pick up on you later on as well, okay?
Thank you very much. It was a fantastic journey, and it's obvious that you've done something that many other asset managers could only dream about. Two things that I reflected on. One is that you have not mentioned so much incentive models. Incentive models are part of the financial industry's curse and privilege. How will these incentive models, giving the long term talking about, need to be changed and give that sort of an extra spark into the mainstream industry in order to find the new ways how to motivate people? And you talk about cultures. In our culture, in our industry, being the asset managers, may be a bit different from the rest of the industries. How will incentive models need to reflect the environmental, social, and governance models, giving they will pay off on the long term?
Right. That's a great question, and it's particularly good because I wanted to mention that in my remarks, and I forgot, so thank you. That's the bad thing about not having notes. You sometimes forget stuff, and I did. To me, there are two questions around incentives. One is within the asset management businesses or asset ownership businesses themselves. Unfortunately, today, many of the incentives in financial services, in fact, reward short-term action and actually often inappropriate action, bad action, unethical action. That needs to change. Absolutely needs to change. And we in finance need to be very careful because our license to operate is impaired already, and it easily could become even more significantly impaired. And unless I and I may sound defensive because of my prior life, but most folks cannot distinguish between a pension fund, an asset manager, a hedge fund manager, a private equity manager, or an investment banker. We're all in finance. And so we all need to be careful about this. The second point is the models that we have used in finance will probably need to change. So, for example, in private equity, and even indeed in public equity, we have structures and I guess processes that actually are arbitrary. So, for example, in private equity, you tend to have a 5-year fund that then a 5-year workout fund or harvesting period, and then 2 1-year extensions. That's completely arbitrary. No one said, well, most businesses grow that way. That's not, in fact, the case. And as we think about the transition to low-carbon economy, as well as a resource-constrained world, a world where we're actually reusing a lot of products, where we're sharing products, we will need to think of different economic models for sure. And if we can go into this challenge with a clean sheet of paper and fresh eyes, that will serve us all well.
Thank you very much. Just yes and no, quick one, nasty.
Very quick one.
Yes, okay. Is impact investment an Anglo-Saxon trade-off for not including ESG into the mainstream?
No.
Very good. We'll be back to you guys. Okay, thank you once again,
you.
David. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Down, go.
Yes.